Hello, dear listener. Welcome to my channel, where stories are so scary that only the bravest and most fearless can listen. If you are sure that you are brave enough, subscribe to my channel and I will question your bravery. But before you do, let me warn you, these stories are not for the faint of heart. They are not for people who scare easily. They are for people with ice in their veins and darkness in their hearts. If you are one of those people, then I welcome you. Come closer, listen closely, and prepare yourself for the horror that awaits. I'm a hunter, and I like to hunt wild boars specifically. Though I have been a deer hunter and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife make it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as a rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy-to-find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy-to-navigate clearing. The night started uneventful. Mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. The spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. The deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was almost 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up. Maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision per se. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little bit. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear. It was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? They couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming up the road from where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. A very compelling female voice. Help! I'm lost! There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. I went against everything I've been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? Help! Please! I can't walk! The voice called out. That's when I knew. He was lying. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good I mistook him for a bear. That's a trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't care in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction. And I swear I saw a smile. The thermoscope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. F off, I screamed as loud as I could in that direction. We stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. They took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round, sailing above his head into the tree line. He was incredibly freaky, but he hadn't really threatened me, nor would I even tell the cops. I was unwilling and unready to actually shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. The next one's gonna mess you up. Go away! He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could only be a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck, breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab and kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about Wendigos and Reikis and Skinwalkers. My story had him about soil himself because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen that monster, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mom, my cousin, had to take him home, and she was pretty livid. I've gone down the rabbit hole once with these scary stories, and I'm not saying what I saw was definitely a Wendigo or a Skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just some random tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. To Beth's, I typically go grocery shopping at around 7 or 8 p.m. nowadays since the store is less crowded around then. However, I try not to go unless I have to because 1, COVID, and 2, being out after sundown doesn't feel comfortable for my safety. I'm a 5-foot, 110-pound woman. Despite this, the area I live and shop in is what I would consider to be safe, so going for a quick grocery run a little later in the evening has felt okay lately. So about 2 weeks ago, I was at my usual grocery store at around 7 p.m. I read somewhere online that you should make your trips to the store 30 minutes or less. And, being the Gemini that I am, I knew I would have to make a list on my phone to follow or I would dawdle. I began my trip in the produce section, essentially only looking up from my phone to step out of people's way or to grab what was on my list. There were more people in the store than there were usually in the evenings when I go, so I had to make a few laps to wait for folks to clear certain areas that I needed to get to. I first realized I needed to do this when I was at the carrot section, but since it was too crowded, I figured I'd circle back in a minute or two and grab something on the other side of the section in the meantime. Trying to determine where to go, I looked up from my phone and began walking towards the bananas. On my way to get them, I just kind of looked forward blankly, not really thinking of anything besides my task at hand. This was short-lived because a man in a gray zip-up hoodie and a black baseball hat had caught my eye as we walked past one another. I was going one direction and he was going the opposite. Nothing really stood out about him besides the fact that he was looking at me and that he was walking really fast. I didn't think anything about it and kept moving towards the bananas. As I gathered my produce and a few things along the way back to the carrots, I passed this man again. He made eye contact with me. Normally, I'm not one to really make eye contact with other patrons. I'm a mind-my-own-business kind of person, but his demeanor just caught my eye. I also noticed that he was the only person in the section not carrying anything. It had to have been at least 3 minutes since we first passed one another, so to think that he was just kind of perusing around and not getting anything was strange. It's not like he just got there either. As I finally get to the carrots, I make my way to the other bakery section, and the man passed me once again. This time I didn't make eye contact, but I tried to run to see where he was going. This sounds silly, but the way he was moving around the store didn't make sense. I was working my way from the front to the back, and he was walking erratically in all different directions. There's only one entrance and exit to the store, so it's not like he could have come in from the other direction. Might I remind you, he still has nothing with him. As I begin to turn my head to see what this man is doing, another guy runs past me wearing all black. Okay, strange. When he ran so close to me, the hair that was in front of my left shoulder was blown behind my back from the gust of air he blew past me. Since I was already turning my head, I fixated to see where this man was going. He had run over to the man that was passing by me frequently, and they were both looking at me and talking to one another. They were about 30 feet away from me, so I couldn't make out what they were saying. I also only looked for maybe a second because it was at this point that I started to get pretty anxious. I'd like to mention that I have generalized anxiety disorder, so when I'm in suspicious situations that might flare up anxiety, I really try to talk myself down from anything that might be illogical. I mean, who would follow me in a grocery store? I wasn't sure what to make of what I was seeing. In an attempt to soothe my anxious thoughts, I decided to continue shopping and tried not to fixate on the other two men. I looked back down at my phone and realized I forgot to grab lemons from the produce section, so I was irritated that I had to go back. I began walking, head down, when a woman knocks my shoulder. I'm already feeling a myriad of emotions at this point, and to be touched by a stranger during this, I got really annoyed. I looked back up behind me to see who could have possibly been clumsy enough to knock into my shoulder when my eyes locked with the woman who's bumped me. Now, this is kind of difficult to explain, but stay with me. It's a pretty popular thing among women to communicate solely through eye contact and body language. Now, I know that all people of all genders do this, but for women specifically, it's different. I've been out with friends that have told me, save me from this creep without saying a single word. So despite the mass and the distance between us, something in me told me to listen to her. She rolled her eyes downwards towards the floor as if a ball were rolling past our feet, in the exact direction of the men that were looking at me and laughing me. She didn't look directly at them, but I knew she was indicating she was about to say something about them. She looked back up at me and in a whisper shout told me, "Heads up." My stomach sank. I knew I wasn't just being paranoid. Someone else had noticed that something weird was going on. I walked past her to her right and said, to indicate that I understood what she meant. It was at this point that I needed to get out of the store without looking panicked or raising suspicions. When I told my boyfriend the story, he questioned why I didn't just leave right then and there. First off, I had a basket full of produce that I needed to pay for. Second, I didn't want to raise suspicions or alert these men as to why someone they're following is suddenly making a run for it. So I swiftly began to navigate the aisles to gather a few more things on my list. As I moved through the store and looked down the aisle to see what items were where, one of the men were in each aisle walking towards me. Every aisle I went down, one of them was there, and I started to feel terrified. I decided it was time to go. I went to the self-checkout and hauled it out of there. I did my best to appear calm, but I know I looked frantic. Since it was dark outside, I didn't feel comfortable walking my car by myself. Once I was done, I approached these 3 employees, chatting amongst each other. I luckily got the attention of a female store manager and thought on my feet. I told her that my ex-boyfriend was in the store following me and I needed to be walked out. In hindsight, I probably just should have alerted them on what actually was going on. But I wanted to get out of there, no questions asked. And she didn't ask questions. She said, "Oh, okay, I'm getting security walk you to your car." And as the guard appeared from the back of the line waiting to use the self-checkout, so did the 2 men. They made eye contact and broke left and right. One went left and one went right. When I tell you I almost soiled myself, my God, my heart was in my throat. Luckily, I didn't see the men outside. The last I saw of them was by that self-checkout. The security guard so kindly walked me to my car and made sure I drove away, which I'm so grateful for. I called my boyfriend sobbing since my anxiety was so high at this point, and he advised me to take a different route home and make 4 right turns if I thought anyone was following me. For precaution, I stayed at a friend's house that night because I was so anxious. I'm so grateful nothing happened to me and that I am here. But I cannot thank the woman who warned me in the store enough for validating my suspicions. If you witness anything that looks sketchy or weird, please tell or warn someone. I haven't heard about kidnappings or crimes towards women in my area recently, thank goodness. It just scares me to think what could have possibly happened and what kind of people are out there. I think it goes without saying that I'm no longer going shopping after sundown, nor at that store. I'm blanking on where I heard this, but I think it really applies to how I felt that night. It's better to be safe than sorry and to be paranoid. The dead. I was around 15, and when I wasn't too busy with school, I worked at a news agency, mainly selling lottery tickets and newspapers. While I had my fair share of creeps, stalkers, and loonies, this one, for me, has to be the scariest. Among my regular customers was an older woman, perhaps in her late 40s or early 50s, although she definitely appeared older than she was. She had straggly hair that was bleached blonde and wore extremely bright, gaudy makeup. No one knew much about her, but she was often seen around different shady men, and from the way she acted and spoke, it was understood that she was most likely on something. She spoke to me and my coworkers of angels and heaven and fairies and demons, but I simply brushed it off as an older lady going through a midlife crisis and dabbling in some sort of new age spirituality. From the very shift I'd served this woman when I was around 13 or 14, she was mesmerized by me. From the moment she saw me, she was enthusiastically running up to coworkers and even other customers telling them that I was an angel. From that shift onwards, every time she saw me, she wouldn't stop talking about how beautiful I was, that it was pure and innocent, and I was an angel. Accordingly, she said I should return to the angels. I didn't see it as anything sinister, even though I got extremely uncomfortable vibes. I was extremely friendly to customers, and I've always been a naturally talkative, bubbly person. In addition, I was still young, naive, and eager to please my boss with my customer service. And even though I thought this lady was kind of weird, I'd often just smile politely as she raved on about whatever fantastical thing she thought up. Over time, she became fixated with me. She slowly began to learn my shifts. And if I was away or my roster changed, she'd ask coworkers where I was. Whenever I was at work, she'd appear. I told my boss this, and how her obsession with me was starting to make me uncomfortable. He told me that I had to put up with it because of the extra income it gave him. Because of her fixation with me, this lady would spend hundreds of dollars at a time on lottery, multiple times a week. Once again, I was young and didn't have too much of a backbone, so even though I felt uncomfortable, I just accepted that this situation couldn't be changed. I needed the money, and not many places in my town were hiring, let alone interested in taking on a school student. One day, as I was going to the spot, I met my parents. They picked me up at a nearby road. This lady appeared seemingly from thin air. I was so startled that I didn't even notice when she grabbed my arm and asked if I'd like to return to the other angels. They're missing you, darling. I was freaked out, but her words didn't mean much to me, and I simply saw it as a strange woman with wacky spiritual beliefs. Luckily that day, an older co-worker walked by, saw this, swiftly yanked me away, and stayed there until my dad arrived. I wish I could say that that was the last time I saw the customer, but it wasn't. Even though I didn't see her waiting for me again, I often felt uncomfortable arriving at work, leaving, and at work itself, as though someone was watching me. This lady kept coming in and kept spending hundreds of dollars from God knows where. However, unlike when I first started, she didn't come in with a different man each time. She came alone, or with one particular man who I hadn't seen before. I always felt extremely uncomfortable around him, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The lady's ravings got even crazier than ever, and in addition to her usual talk about angels, she started to try to getting me to follow her places by claiming the government had tried to poison me just then, and she saw them slip cyanide into my food, or what they infected my toothpaste with, something that would kill me, so I had to follow her now. I never did, obviously. And one time, when I was busy serving other customers, I noticed her in the corner of my eyes, lingering around my drink bottle with something I couldn't see clutched in her hand. Needless to say, I moved my drink bottle very quickly and was extremely unnerved, more so than ever. I told my boss everything, but he continued to say virtually that I'd lose my job if I just didn't put up with it, as she brought in a lot of money. This all came to a climax one day at the end of my shift. I just learned how to cash up the registers and close the shop, which was an exciting responsibility for me and made me feel very accomplished. To close up, I would have to lock the roller doors at the front and exit the back door, which led to a pretty shady concrete area that never had anyone around. It was like a huge concrete jungle, with heaps and twists and turns and tall concrete walls. It was always completely silent and empty. I'd never seen another person in that area outside the back door. And as I exited work and locked the door, I felt incredibly uneasy and thought I could hear breathing behind me. However, seeing no one when I turned around, I thought to myself that it was just paranoia. As I checked my phone to see if my dad had left yet to pick me up, I felt a hand grasp my shoulder, tight. My whole body froze, and before I even looked, I knew who it was. Sure enough, when I turned around, this customer was standing there with a huge grin, her eyes sparkling. She engulfed me in a hug, which I wriggled free from. I could see something was very wrong, so I tried to run, but she grabbed my arm again. She was stronger than she looked. She tried to distract me and started random conversations, sprinkling in comments about how the angels were so excited to be reunited with me. I had no idea what she was trying to do until I heard something pull up around the corner. A white van, all its windows blacked out, slowly crept across the gravel road towards us. And I'll never forget the way that lady's face looked. "Let's go," she said. "The angels have been waiting. You'll be with them again soon." To this day, I have no idea how, but I gained some kind of superhuman fight-or-flight strength. I tugged my arm free just as the van was slowing down beside me, and ran. The lady followed, but thankfully her physical strength didn't extend to running. Thankfully, I knew the twists and turns out of this area quite well now, so I sprinted through this concrete labyrinth until I reached a pillar I knew to duck behind. I didn't move. I had a metal keychain, which made a lot of noise, so I clutched that in one hand, so it wouldn't jangle as my body shook, and held myself up with my other hand, ready to launch from the ground and run as soon as I could. I could hear the woman and someone else, a man, I didn't know who, but he sounded like the man I'd seen with her recently, run around, checking crevices and corners, searching for me. After about 15 minutes, they gave up, and I heard the van roll away. After a final check using the band, they didn't know I could see them, but I saw them pretend to leave, then turn it off and wait. I think they thought I'd emerged from hiding, but as I could see what the trap was, I continued to stay. After what felt like forever, they eventually left. Not knowing that this was another trap set up to coax me out of hiding, I cautiously peered around the corner. Unsure if they were gone, and knowing I was unsafe if I stayed or left, I ran. Thankfully, my dad was parked where we had agreed to meet, and I raced to the car. I was scolded for getting to the car late, and then we went home. I took an extended leave after that, and when I eventually did go back to work, that lady was thankfully gone, and I never saw her again. Whenever I've been around people in my work industry, we always hear of the horror stories of crazy cults. People getting paid for weird requests and such, but I never thought with my luck that I'd have to worry about being in one of these stories. But boy, was I wrong. This is probably going to be a mini-series since it's a bit long. For some background, I'm a very much introverted person. I don't go out much, if it's outside my small group of friends. I started doing OnlyFans around this time, where it was very popular in quarantine. I had already been on FetLife, which is sort of a network like Facebook for the kink community, so I was thinking of doing OnlyFans wouldn't be too hard, considering I was already involved in that community because my work at the adult store and my time on FetLife. Usually with friend requests, I don't normally accept them if I don't know the person in real life due to past events and issues online. My red flag radar was fairly used to sensing something was off if I was in danger. However, this time it was a silent danger I wasn't prepared for. I had begun posting regular content on my account and was told to make a Twitter from my fan base from my work, which made sense at the time. I was fairly new to the idea. I was logged into my Fet to check my messages for the day, and a new friend request popped up with a message. Thank you, insert my name on Fet, for taking the time to read my message. We'll call him Woofy, excited to help you with your OnlyFans because I see you have potential and I can help. Please feel free to message if interested in working together. Woofy. I wasn't sure why the message came off so proper with the tagline of something to the effect of, join us. It's been a few months, so my memory is a bit fuzzy to all the exact details because I mainly wanted to block out as much as I could. I started looking at the profile to see if I could find any reason not to add them to my account because I was fairly new to having people I didn't know as friends. I saw that he was in a pack with several other women in all different age groups and that we all had an OnlyFans and modeling in common, which wasn't something that was alarming to me. I added him back and shortly after that began the introduction into the cult. I slowly started getting more messages in my inbox about how they could help me because I was now one of the pack. I didn't think it meant anything more than being friendly. Something in the back of my mind was telling me to be careful, but as stupid is as stupid does, I paid it no mind. And I wish I had now in retrospect. When I was at work, Wolfie would blow up my inbox with messages saying he added me to a group on Twitter that was special because it had all of our pages in it and we had to do a chain off if one girl posted about her OnlyFans. We had to share it and keep the pack happy, which seemed harmless in my mind. That became an every hour a new post was made and we had to share and do the same in return for ours. I thought this was normal for Twitter because I hardly ever use it. I was put in two chats, the main chat and the one with just Wolfie and his wife because she wanted to see if I was a good match for their pack. He would often send me photos of them in bed and say things like, one day you'll be in the middle of us where you belong. Mind you, I'm in a relationship with my partner of 8 years at this point, so I wasn't sure if he was just kidding or not. He would send me messages of him telling me how to post my pages, my photos, and anytime I had updated my Fat Life with new modeling photos, he was the first to comment, "This is my cub. Appreciate her, or I'll end you." Things of that nature. I get the whole being alpha thing, but it was just getting creepy to me that just seconds after my post went live, it was already getting attention. To my knowledge, there isn't a way to get notifications of someone's posts on that specific site like Twitter, and Muskie had my page open, waiting. I started to feel more strange vibes when he started sending me messages via his wife and her telling me someday we were all going to get a place in the middle of nowhere. No one would find us, and we'd all do this work together and live together in this wolf alpha-based lifestyle. Which sounds like a cult now that I'm actually writing this. There were 4 other girls that were all doing the same thing, listening and doing everything their alpha said. A few days went by, and Wolfie started making me feel really uncomfortable. He posted a writing of his own on this page and made sure to tell me in the group that I was his favorite new little cub, and that this was for my own good. The writing was about how he loved me and told me to be in his outfit and wait for him in my room for him. He snuck into my apartment and attacked my partner, beat him close to death, and brought him up into my room. He wrote I had to choose who I loved more. He wrote I chose him over my partner, and that he then dominated me and killed my partner, and I was stolen away to live with him in his pack forever. My stomach had dropped out of my body as I reread the story he made up. The details of my apartment he couldn't possibly know. The things about my home nobody knew unless they were in my home scared me. I was on edge for days because I didn't have a clue how he knew these details. My skin was crawling. I told him I didn't know how I felt of this story, that he fantasized about me and his world. I knew that this was the reason I had to run. Wolfie kept showing the rest of his pack the story and had me under his list of relationships as his submissive, and in a poly relationship with me and his wife. My skin for days was crawling with the fear of me not knowing how he knew all the things he knew. I never posted about my home. They saw a post of me in a bad mood from a disagreement, but that obviously couldn't because he just wrote some really messed up fantasy murder about me, was it? The rest of the week, I wore oversized clothes and cried on and off because I was terrified to be alone in my apartment. I showed my partner and friend, and they both agreed that this was not something I would be able to handle on my own. I took myself out of the groups on Twitter for a start and tried not to draw attention to Wolfie when the girls started messaging me out of the blue, saying they didn't understand why I wanted to be brainwashed by my partner, and they loved me and everything would be fine if I went with them. I deleted my Twitter and also my OnlyFans because I didn't know what they could find on me. I blocked them all on all my new accounts, and I also took down my profile on Fat Life and made a new one with a completely different name and credentials so they couldn't find me. I even changed my number because Wolfie found out what it was to try and get me to talk to him and explain while I was pulling away. I made new accounts and made sure everyone was aware that needed to know about this potential stalker so I could maintain my sanity. I thought it was over when a week had passed and I didn't see any new messages on my new profile on Fat Life or my messages. But boy, was I wrong. My best friend had checked her messages on Instagram where, of course, he found me via her. He asked if she knew where I was and if I was okay because it disappeared out of nowhere. I thought I had escaped the nightmare. I went onto my Instagram I had made and had a few different messages from him about him coming to get to rescue and save me. I was terrified about how far this guy would go to get to me. Why couldn't he just leave me alone? I blocked him again and countless times of changing my names and such. I had finally reached a point of just getting into the habit of bringing my knife to work in my boots and locking my deadbolt when I was alone because I didn't want to be afraid anymore. This was almost a month of me being terrified out of my mind. I made one last post to my Fat Life about him so all my following could see that I was in actual danger. And I was done being afraid, and openly said that if they were wanting to come for me, I'd be ready with law enforcement and such. And thankfully after that post was made public, I went to check his profile to see if it was still up, and it was gone. It's been a few months since this had happened, and thank God I haven't had any weird messages, or my friends getting anything weird from this whole thing. I wish I would have listened to my intuition about this in the first place. Maybe then it could have all been avoided. Thankfully, I am safe from this insane wolf pack cult. Into late 2018, I worked at a grocery store slash deli and worked in the deli bakery area. Towards the end of the year, I had just gotten out of a 2-year relationship. It hit me pretty hard, so I was in a funk because of it. We just hired a new employee in the deli who we'll call John. I was scheduled on his first day, so I was one of the employees who trained him. John seemed nice enough, and he got on quickly, which was great. Fast forward to our next shift. I was pretty close with another coworker, we'll call her Jane. Jane knew what had been going on with my breakup and would check up on me often. And John overheard this interaction. He came up to me on my break and apologized for what I was going through and just generally being sweet about the whole thing. I appreciated it, so I thanked him. I don't think at this time he was trying to be weird, but if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have entertained it in the slightest. After our next shift together, it was raining pretty heavy. A rainy day in mid-November where I live is typically pretty cold. At the time, John didn't have a car, but he was within walking distance, about 10 minutes of work. Side note, my fatal flaw back then was that I was and am way too nice to people. I offered him a ride since it was pouring rain and freezing. The ride home was fine. He thanked me and told me he'd see me tomorrow. And this is where stuff starts to hit the fan. John began to flirt with me, making really inappropriate jokes, and would do that thing where he would grab my hips and kind of rub against me to get past me, often in front of customers. He also got my number from my boss, and his claim for needing it was, she's the only one that can cover my shift on X day. He would text me constantly and proclaim his love for me and tell me that he would treat me better than my ex did. We would usually have 3 people working the deli, and on shifts with John when our third would go on break, he would take this as an opportunity to harass me more. At the time, I was very soft-spoken and scared out of my mind to speak up about it or stand up for myself. I ended up putting in my 2 weeks, but not before sending him a text along the lines of, F you, you're gross, lose my number and never talk to me again. He texted me back apologizing and invited me over as he wanted to talk to me face to face to make up for it. As I said, my fatal flaw back then was that I was way too nice to people. In my head, I thought that I must have gotten through to him. I mentioned it to my friend who we'll call Eve, and Eve was very adamant that I tell him no and to leave it alone. Unfortunately, I chose not to listen to her advice. Instead, I told him that I appreciated the apology and that I would come talk to him, but I was going to bring Eve with me as I didn't trust being alone with him at his house. He agreed. Eve was very reluctant, but insisted I bring her along if I absolutely had to go, just in case. We drove to John's house, and when we arrived, he didn't come out. I remember texting him a few question marks, and after having no reply, I turned around and left. He then texted me apologizing, saying to come back and talk to him in his car. Against Eve's better judgment, I turned around. I pulled back into his driveway and got an instant feeling of dread. Something absolutely did not feel right. I threw my car in reverse, but before I got the chance to move, his dad and his 2 brothers hopped out of the car and surrounded mine. They began pounding on my windows, trying to open the doors, and stood behind my car so I couldn't leave. Eve and I are obviously scared out of our minds at this point. I got a surge of adrenaline and didn't care who was behind me. I floored it out of the driveway. Thankfully, nobody was hit, but I sped off. I pulled into the parking lot of my work to collect myself and pulled my phone out to block his number. I then noticed a car speeding into the parking lot of my work, and they tried to surround me again. I don't know how I managed to get out of this, but I did. I then began getting calls from random numbers. I assume his dad and brothers, and they began threatening to kill me and say that they were armed and planned on shooting my tires. They followed us for quite some time, and Eve called the police. We were instructed to pull into a nearby gas station where an officer was already waiting. I did make a report, but they told me that ultimately, there was nothing that I could do or that could be done. I did end up reporting this to my manager, who told me that they couldn't do anything either as it happened off company property, which is only half true. I didn't stay my full final 2 weeks. John continued to harass me anonymously for months after this, and law enforcement refused to help me. Their excuse was that nothing could be done unless he acted on his threats. Whenever I would visit the area, he would somehow always find me and follow me until I would get onto the highway. I will admit that this is mostly my fault for being so trusting and thinking that John actually wanted to speak with me and be civil, and I should have listened to Eve from the get-go. It isn't my fault for being harassed, but I shouldn't have been so trusting because I could have avoided the majority of this problem. It's been nearly 2 years since this happened, and I've not heard from nor seen John since. I just hope that it stays that way. The story happened when I was 17. Now I'm 21. I used to live in a small city in France with my mom and my dog in a little neighborhood where almost everybody knows each other. There was mostly old people living around me, but a few weeks before my story happened, a family moved in the house next to mine. I don't remember seeing them. I just heard children laughing and playing in the yard sometimes. Every year in January, my mom goes on holiday for a month in different countries, so my grandmother, who lived 5 minutes away, used to come and stay with me at my home. But this year I was old enough to stay alone, so I did. I wasn't really sociable at this time, but my best friend was. She was always trying to make and meet new people, so we decided to take advantage of the fact that my mom was away to do a party in my place. It was more like a pre-game than a party because everybody was going to the club after this, but I didn't want to go with them. I never really enjoyed it, and the city center was far from home, so my plan was to just invite everybody, make some friends, have some drinks, and go to bed. The night came and everybody arrived. We were 3 girls and 5 boys. I was having a good time, even though I was a bit stressed that someone breaks into the house or something or gets sick on the carpet, but none of this happened and we were just sitting on the terrace, chatting and drinking with music. Then we heard a knock at the door. It was about 11 p.m. when this happened, so I thought it was just a neighbor coming to complain about the noise. I told everybody to stay quiet and I turned down the music. One of the guys opened the door to see who it was and then came to me saying, "Hey, there's your new neighbor at the door. He wants to come in and party with us." I was confused, so I went to the door to see him. There appeared a man. He seemed like he was maybe 35 years old, bald, glasses, not tall, but a bit corpulent, with a bottle of Jack Daniels in his hand. My first reaction was to laugh because I couldn't believe this guy wanted to party with teenagers like us, and if it was true, it would have been super weird. But obviously, it was true. He told me he was new here, so he didn't know anybody. He was happy to see some young people and just wanted to share a drink with us. What I could understand because, as I said before, there really was a lot of old people around. I thought maybe we all looked older than we really were, so I told the man everybody in the house was under 18 and made him understand that he really wasn't welcome here. But everybody thought he was just trying to be nice and didn't see it as wrong, so I was influenced and decided to let him sit on the terrace with us. I still didn't feel very safe, so I told him, "Please, just don't go into the house." One of the guys told me not to worry, that he'll keep an eye on him. The night was going on, everybody was having fun, and finally nothing appeared to be that strange. The man was talking with everybody about basic stuff, making jokes, laughing with the guys. He just seemed like a nice fella. Even if a bit lost, stay with underage people when you have your wife and children probably waiting for you next door. That was just my opinion. I started to relax and enjoy our time. Then at about 2 a.m. it was time for everybody to go to the club, for me to clean up a bit, and then I was gonna head to bed. They all left at the same time, and the man left too, saying he was going home. We'd been on the terrace most of the time, so the cleaning was fast. I closed the windows, locked the door, at least I thought it did at least, and went to bed, watching Pretty Little Liars to fall asleep. 1 hour later, I heard a noise. Remember when I said I had a dog? Well, his tiny paws used to make a tip-tap noise when he was walking on the wooden floor. But I was so used to this noise that this time, I knew it wasn't him walking on the floor. My room was on the 2nd floor, up on the ground floor, so I went out of bed, ran down the stairs, and stopped. The man was here, in the middle of my house, staring at me. This maybe lasted 2 seconds, then he ran out of the house and smashed the door behind him. I called the police straight away to tell them what happened. They told me to close my door, and that was it. I was paralyzed. I didn't know what to do. My mom was at the other end of the world and didn't know I was having a party at home. So I called my dad, who was living 10 minutes away, but he didn't answer. I took my fluffy shoes, closed my door with a key, and decided to run as fast as I could to my grandma's apartment. I barely had clothes on, running in the middle of the night, hoping that the guy wasn't following me. When I arrived, I didn't want my grandmother to have a heart attack, so I just stayed in the hallway, lying on the floor and waiting for the morning to come. I called my friends to tell her. She was shocked and told me she was coming back to me, but she had to wait for the first bus, about 6 in the morning. When the sun finally came up, I went back to my place, and all the people who were there with me arrived too. They were determined to confront this neighbor. They knocked at his door, but he wasn't gonna answer, so they broke his front gate, which literally fell on the floor. It was made with some terrible wood, so pretty easy to break. And then the man came and started shouting, and one of the guys punched him in the face. But that felt good to see. After this, everybody went home. I put my ideas back to place and went to the police to make a complaint against him. The police officer told me he was going to see him in the afternoon. After this, my dad asked why I called him at this time of the night, so I explained what happened, and he went to see the man too. The problem is, the man didn't say the same version of my dad to the police. At first, he said he forgot his wallet in the house, which is impossible because I made sure that he didn't put a single foot inside the house. Then he said that he thought the party wasn't over, which is also impossible because he left at the same time as everybody else and knew I was staying home alone. I still don't know why he came back, and I'm not sure. I want to know. This girl for a while now. Her name is Isabel, and we've been going out for over a year very soon, and all's going well in that regard. However, when we first met, she told me about a less than ideal ex-boyfriend she had a couple of years before she had met me. They still went to the same school, and he ended up going to the same university as us after we graduated high school as well. Apart from that, all three of us went to the same church, meaning there was a lot of opportunity for him to meet us. The creepy encounters with him, Jose being his name, started a little before we graduated high school. After he heard we were dating, he was furious, even going as far as to try and say I was abusive on Twitter. But nobody believed him, given his accusation was complete nonsense, and he was notorious for doing the same in the past in order to keep Isabel from talking to other guys when they were together. That's just the beginning, though. It started out small at first, seeing him at the mall whenever we would go out on dates. After a while, it seemed like a little too much to seem like a coincidence, though. He started showing up to our church, which, although it wouldn't ever really be abnormal, he all of a sudden joined the same youth ministry as well. It seemed as if though he was trying to get as close to us as possible at times. There was one instance I remember very specifically at a grad party everybody was invited to. Everyone was in the backyard, and I remember looking across the patio and just seeing him staring at me and Isabel from the other side. His eyes didn't move, and his breathing was very heavy, as if though he was angry or anxious, or both. He didn't try anything that night, though, probably because some of the other people that were there that night. After I left the party and dropped off my girlfriend at her house for the night, I saw a black car following me for the majority of the way home, which I didn't really think much of, and not to sound like that guy or anything, but I wasn't too worried about it either. I'm fairly well built, and I've done martial arts for well over 6 years. The next day, that same car was tailing me almost the whole day while I was running errands. Things got a little heated in the afternoon, though. I was sitting in my car outside of the store waiting for a curbside pickup when he parked a few spaces down from me, got out of his car, and came up to my window. He started yelling at me, saying I would never be good enough for Isabel, and that she still loved him no matter what I thought, and that he was going to make sure that she and I were never together. I just tried to ignore him. Starting anything would have probably been a bad move given that he hadn't even touched me or my car, but I was still a little heated. After heading home, it was already pretty late, so I just played video games for a while till I was tired enough to go to sleep. When I was walking back to my room, I saw him from my window, just standing there on the sidewalk looking right at me. The only reason I knew it was him was because of the light from one of the street lamps. My parents had also seen him and asked me to go check it out, since they aren't the youngest of people and wouldn't be able to do much other than yell at him to go away. But as soon as I walked out, he just got in his car and left. This happened every night for about 3 nights straight. The last night I ever saw him was unlike the others, except this time he didn't leave when I went outside. In fact, he started walking closer to me. I didn't notice until he was a lot closer, but he had something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a fairly large knife he would use in the kitchen. Adrenaline kicked in, and I ran back into the house and told my mom to call 911, after which I went back outside. He was just there in the front yard waiting. When I stepped outside, he said, "Isabella belongs to me, and I'm gonna make that happen no matter what." He ran at me with the knife, but muscle memory kicked in, and I had him pinned down after that. The cops came shortly after, and I explained the situation to them, after which he was immediately arrested with a couple of different charges that I don't quite recall right now. One other thing I do remember, however, was what was inside his car. When the police came, they also searched his car to see if he had anything else I should have been worried about. And they found a bunch of tape, rope, another large knife, a handgun, and a camera. I don't know what was going on through his head, but I could at least guess from that kit that he had in his back seat that he planned on hurting me in some way and recording it. I hate to think of what would have happened if he had tried to come into the house while everyone was asleep. But I'm glad that he was arrested for what he did, or planned to do. It's a bit of a rough area in my opinion, which occasionally has some sketchy characters going about. There are 2 buildings, and one of them is a washroom where the residents all go to use the washing and drying facilities. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and I use these facilities not often as I'd like, because more often when I go, the same guy just keeps reappearing. The washroom is usually busy. It can take a few visits to go at a time when a machine is not in use. Despite that it's very rare to ever see anybody in there, there's no one person I've ever seen in there twice, except the man who's always washing his teddies. The first few times I saw him, he didn't say much. He looks like someone you'd give a wide berth. He has visible twitches and possible learning difficulties, but didn't usually say anything. Until one time after a few run-ins, when he took his teddy out of the machine, held it up like Mr. Bean and said, "Hello," to me through the teddy. I can't exactly remember my reaction. I know that when I responded, I tried to be as nice as possible, considering he probably has learning difficulties and could need a special approach. By now, I've lived here for over 2 years, and he's the only person who keeps reoccurring in the washroom. And this time, I'm in there before he is, and he's standing at the door. I try to make polite conversation as I'm busy doing my laundry, while he stood at the door with his full attention on me. When he speaks, he sounds normal. His tone and demeanor is different than the way he normally is. He talks about how awful lockdown is, tells me where he works and that he still has to work. You know, normal stuff. After a moment had passed, he, quite firmly and in an irritated tone, says, "I'm just trying to be socially distant." I apologize and give him plenty of room to get by. He goes to his machine beside me and takes out a teddy from his laundry and again, like before, speaks through his teddy. I was about done filling the machine at this point and told him to take care of himself and left, feeling very rattled by the strange change in character from the man who spends all his time washing his teddies. When I returned to the washroom to put my clothes in the dryer, I'd taken my time to return, maybe 2 hours or so. I didn't want to run into the guy again by going back at the same time as him. However, when I got there, Someone had been in before me and removed my clothes. They had been thrown all down the back of the washer, definitely not accidentally, and this really freaked me out. I picked it all back up, threw it in the dryer, and rushed back to my flat and told my boyfriend what had happened. He told me not to go back tonight, and that he'd go to finish it off. However, he just started cooking, so it was a long time before he returned. When he went to the dryer I'd put our clothes in, they too had been removed and thrown all down the backs of the dryers. Nothing else in the washroom had been tampered with. And to me, this said that I was targeted. The first instance, I thought that maybe someone had a bad day. But with hours between my moves and my clothes being targeted, I felt directly threatened. I know this could be coincidence. It could be nothing. But my instincts tell me something more sinister could be going on, and could have been going on for a long time. With no real evidence, I can't raise an alarm with the police, but I am very scared. I'm going to continue documenting this. But thank you. I was 14 when this happened, and I was with my best friend Holly, who was 17. We were both very small ladies, and obviously at the time, very young. It was a Friday night, and Holly and I were at her friend's place for a little get-together. Despite being underage, we drank way too much, and by the time we decided to go home at midnight, we weren't very steady on our feet. We live in a small city in Canada, and for the most part, it was pretty safe. I was staying the night at Holly's place, and since we were both drunk, we took the short bus ride home. The closest bus stop was about 1 kilometer from her place. The bus stop is a park and ride, so there was a well-lit parking lot, and the rest of the walk was a quiet residential road with no street lighting. We walked this route heaps before and didn't think twice about walking it on this particular night. We got off the bus, both still drunk and enjoying our walk back to hers. We walked through the parking lot, which had a few cars parked, and started into the darkness. Everything was pretty ordinary thus far, but I noticed Holly got quiet and started to walk faster. I figured she was sobering up and keen to get home, so I started walking faster to keep up. She looked at me, seeing I was oblivious to my surroundings, and told me she thought someone was following us. I looked back to see a person walking behind us, but a decent distance away. No one else got off the bus with us, and no one was around when we got off the bus, so we reckoned this person came from the parking lot. We both started to sober up real quick, but tried to rationalize the situation against our gut instincts. We looked behind us every few seconds to gauge the situation and could see the person was gaining on us. We could now make out that the person was a full-grown male. We were both starting to panic and run scenarios through our head when Holly told me that we needed to run. Because when we looked back, he had a bat. We both started running, and as I did, I looked behind to see that this dude did in fact have a baseball bat. I can't remember if he was running too or just speed walking, but he was still following us. I remember feeling this horrible urgency and panic overcome me and survival instincts kick in. Holly and I both knew we could not stop running until we were inside the door, locked. I know from running track that if you look behind while you run, you slow down. Against all my instincts, I didn't look behind me, and after what seemed like ages, we made it home. We ran into the house, shaking and crying, and luckily Holly's dad was awake. We told him what happened, and he had us call the cops while he got in his car. He wanted to drive around the road to see if he could find the dude and get a better description for the police, but he didn't see him. I'm not sure when we lost him or if he followed us all the way home, but nothing ever came of the situation. It's now been over 10 years since this went down, and I try not to think about what could have happened, but the thought of a grown man waiting inside of his car with a baseball bat for vulnerable people to walk by gives me goosebumps. For more bone-chilling narratives that will keep you at the edge of your seat, subscribe to my channel. By doing so, you'll gain a still growing collection of real-life horror stories that will both captivate and energize your senses. Join the community of fellow enthusiasts, and together, let's explore the eerie unknown. Subscribe now, and prepare for more terror-tingly true tales that will leave you craving more.